50, the nays are 49. The motion to discharge is agreed to, and the bill will be placed on the calendar.
And now, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of S-2093 for the People Act of 2021.
Is there objection? Seeing none, so ordered. Oh, Senator from Texas. Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object, this bill would constitute a federal government takeover of elections. It would constitute a massive power grab by Democrats. It would disenfranchise millions of Americans, and it would do precisely the opposite of its nominal title, for the people. It is instead for the politicians, because it entrenches politicians and ensures that the people cannot vote them out of office. It would strike down virtually every reasonable voter integrity law in the country, including voter ID laws supported by the overwhelming majority of this country, including prohibitions on ballot harvesting, again widely supported by people in this country. It would mandate that felons be allowed to vote, and it would automatically register millions of illegal aliens to vote. It would profoundly undermine democracy in this country, and for that reason I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
the Republican minority has just prevented the Senate from even having a debate, just that, on voting rights in this country. I understand my Republican colleagues don't approve of every aspect of the Democratic bill to protect voting rights. But surely there are areas where our two parties can find some agreement. Partisan gerrymandering, for instance, has plagued our country for too long. It skews our democracy towards the extremes. It strips the American people of their right to have a truly representative government. Voters ought to pick their politicians, not the other way around. But in so many states, partisan legislators draw maps that artificially maximize the number of seats that the majority party will win. Some districts are so safe that the most extreme candidates can run and win with hardly any competition. Surely my Republican colleagues would agree that partisan gerrymandering deserves a debate on the Senate floor. It's a small part of S1, but one that has broad universal support. So I ask unanimous consent, and the support, by the way, of all 50 of my colleagues, of 49 of my Democratic colleagues. So I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-2670, Calendar 119, the Redistricting Reform Act of 2021.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object, the text of the Constitution explicitly assigns the power to engage in redistricting to elected state legislatures in the states. There is a reason for that. That ensures that redistricting is controlled by the people. We have an unfortunate pattern in today's Congress, which is today's Democrats no longer believe in democracy. Their Bill S1, what many call the Corrupt Politicians Act, is designed to prevent the voters from voting Democrats out of office. This bill, the bill to remove the state legislatures from their constitutionally appointed responsibility of being in charge of redistricting, would instead assign that to commissions and ultimately to the federal courts, to unelected federal judges. Now, redistricting and gerrymandering can lead to ugly consequences. This is not new. The founders were well aware of the ugly consequences of gerrymandering. Indeed, the very word gerrymander comes from Eldridge Gerry, one of the founders whose district was so contorted it looked like a salamander. That's where the district came from. The founders knew that if you give redistricting to elected politicians, they will act based on political concerns. The reason the founders did so is, even with those downsides, it keeps the process accountable to the people. If you instead hand it over to unelected commissions or to unelected federal judges, the people are disenfranchised. That is a serious mistake. I would note, over a decade ago, I defended the constitutionality and the constitutional assignment of that responsibility to the state legislatures before the United States Supreme Court in the Texas redistricting case, and we won a landmark 5-4 victory where the Supreme Court upheld the clear constitutional authorization of legislatures to engage in redistricting, even if they engage in political concerns, because the check on that is not unelected judges second-guessing the people. Rather, the check on that is democracy and the people engaging in their own check and balance. Accordingly, I object.
Mr. President.
The objection is heard. The Majority Leader.
So the American people should understand Republicans just blocked the Senate from even debating legislation to end partisan gerrymandering and make our Congress more representative of the people. Surely our Republican colleagues, however, would agree that billions of dollars in anonymous campaign donations every year is not a function of a healthy democracy. Surely they must agree that America's representatives should have only one boss, the people, not the special interests. So I'm going to ask the Senate now to debate a simple measure to bring a much-needed transparency to campaign donations. Just transparency, not even limits, although I would certainly support those. At the very least, the American people deserve to know who is trying to influence their representatives and how strenuously. So I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S. 2671, Calendar 120, the Disclose Act of 2021, which has the support of our entire caucus.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object. You know, I would note there is a long history of government trying to force the disclosure of the identity of political contributions, and much of that history is sordid. Indeed, in a landmark case before the United States Supreme Court, racist Southern Democratic politicians tried to force the NAACP to hand over their donor list. And they wanted to do so for reasons that were not difficult to discern, because they intended to persecute those who dared contribute to the NAACP. And the Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, concluded that the Constitution protects against that forced disclosure. But I will say, the Majority Leader said just a few minutes ago, that surely there must be some area of common ground, and indeed there is on this issue. I think all of us, if we were speaking in a moment of candor, if we were not engaged in our typical partisan battle on the floor, would acknowledge the current system is stupid. The current system makes no sense. Super PACs make no sense. Why is that? Because in all of our elections, every one of us has run for elections, there are super PACs, which are independent groups. It is illegal for us as candidates to speak with those independent groups. And in every one of our races, I see the senator from Arizona. He's going to have a hotly contested race. It wouldn't surprise me to see $100 million or more spent in his race, perhaps on both sides. Much of that will be spent in super PACs. It is illegal for us as candidates to communicate with those super PACs, and so we are left with the bizarre situation where there's millions or sometimes tens of millions of dollars being spent on behalf of us, millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars being spent attacking us, and we can't communicate with them. We hope it has some bearing or relevance to what we believe. Every Congress since I've been here, I've introduced legislation to end this. This is legislation called the Super PAC Elimination Act. This act does two very simple things. Number one, it allows unlimited individual contributions to federal campaigns. Not from unions, not from corporations, but from real human beings, from people, unlimited contributions. I would note, this is the way the state of Texas handles state elections. Number two, my legislation, the Super PAC Elimination Act, requires immediate 24-hour disclosure. So if an individual writes a check to a campaign, that gets disclosed immediately, and you can debate about whether that contribution was corrosive or not. This legislation would not prohibit super PACs, but as a practical matter, super PACs would fade from relevance, because every candidate would much prefer money given to their campaign where you can spend on your own message. It would make far more sense to have an open, transparent system. Accordingly, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of a bill at the desk that would protect freedom of speech in America's electoral process and ensure transparency in campaign finance. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that a motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I object to the senator from Texas's legislation. It's obvious to just about every American it would make a bad situation even worse. So I object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection? Is there objection to the original request from the Senator of New York?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, in
Majority
conclusion,
Leader.
before I turn it over to some of my colleagues, so Democrats have tried to do something very simple. We asked the Senate to start debate, just debate, on legislation to protect voting rights and strengthen our democracy. Republicans said no. Democrats asked to debate a measure just to prevent partisan gerrymandering. And frankly, in my colleague's response, he was all over the lot. It's good to have politicians do it. It's not good to have politicians do it. It's good to have judges do it. It's not good to have judges do it. We would set standards to make sure that in a state like Wisconsin, where 53% of the people voted for a Democratic member of the state assembly, only a third of the districts were Democratic, drawn by a Republican legislature. So Republicans have said no, they don't even want to debate these issues. Democrats asked to debate a measure to bring much-needed transparency to campaign donations and get special interest dark money out of politics. Republicans still said no. So let there be no mistake about what is going on here. We have reached a point in this chamber where Republicans appear to oppose any measure, no matter how common sense, to protect voting rights and strengthen our democracy. Let there be no mistake, both inside this chamber and outside of it. Republicans have formed a wall, a total wall, of opposition against progress on voting rights in the United States Senate. Even on an issue as sacred as the right to vote, Senate Republicans refuse to allow even a debate. They're afraid to debate it. Yesterday morning, we saw what it looks like when the Senate comes together. This is what it looks like when it doesn't. Apparently, there are very serious and important limits to bipartisanship. There are some issues where Republicans refuse to join us in good faith to make progress for our country. I never thought I'd see the day when voting rights, which used to be supported in a bipartisan way as recently as 2006, would be one of those issues. But that's what we have come to, total Republican intransigence when it comes to simple measures to make our democracy more perfect and strengthen the hand of the individual voter. Now, let me be clear. Republicans refusing to support anything on voting rights is not an excuse for Democrats to do nothing. In recent weeks, I have met with a number of Democratic senators.
The full document illustrates an assignment and assumption of business interest. The part next to me is a signature block in unaltered form, including one typographical error. The signature block includes Hunter Biden, two of his companies, and individuals connected to the communist Chinese regime. These are the main companies that Hunter Biden and his associates use to funnel money all over the world. Hudson West 3, Hudson Hudson 5, and then the other ones are Coldwater Harbor Capital and Owasco. Owasco is Hunter Biden's firm that was a recipient of millions of dollars from questionable financial transactions. Go Win Dong, this gentleman here was the right-hand man for the owner of a company called CEFC China Energy Company. Merwin Yang was his associate. CEFC was an arm of the Chinese government. Hunter Biden was a close business partner of these men and their companies. Therefore, this signature block shows a direct financial and legal relationship between Hunter Biden and individuals connected to the communist regime. Now, these are the same folks and companies that we discussed at length in our September 2020 report. This new document is yet another record that substantiates our report that we issued September 2020. That same report that the media and my Democrat colleagues said was based on Russian disinformation. So, I now say to the media, and I now say to my Democrat colleagues that said that our report was Russian disinformation, this question: is this signature block Russian disinformation? Are the names of these companies Russian disinformation? Is this document disinformation? No. This is a legitimate record that my staff uncovered, and it didn't come from the Hunter Biden laptop. This is the same type of record that Senator Johnson and I based our report several months ago on. So, to my Democratic colleagues who falsely smeared our report, you're in the majority. You are now committee chairs, and that you have jurisdiction over these matters. So I want to challenge you to use the same effort and energy that you exerted in the Trump-Russia investigation to expose the extensive ties between the Chinese regime and members of the Biden family. And I think I speak with some credibility on this point because you know there was a President Trump, and at the time there was a President Trump, I investigated Donald Trump Jr. on things that were appropriate at that time to ask legitimate questions about in the...
Always never had that opportunity.